Hey everyone, it's Richard Metal Fan here. I'm bringing you guys an old school album review, and I really should have reviewed this album when it for its 20th anniversary last year, but hey, better late than never, right? And as you can see below the title, today we're going to be looking into one of the most classic albums in metalcore. We're going to talk about Of One Blood by Shadows Fall, the band's second album released in April of 2000 through Century Media Records. Now, Shadows Fall is considered to be what I would consider like the Massachusetts metalcore movement is to what Alice in Chains is to the grunge movement or Obituary to the death metal movement. And Shadows Fall is often considered to be the band that defined metalcore by the way that we all know and love it. I mean, sure, they were calling it when they first started, and there was a level of experimentation that was involved when creating this genre, and I don't think there was any like preconceived ideas when you're listening to like the legacy of this band or even any of the other metalcore bands. Like when you really listen to this album or even like their debut album Somber Ice the Sky or even later albums such as like The Art of Balance, Threads of Life, and etc., there's no denying that they're one of the masters when it comes to this genre. Now, when you look at what Brian Fair was able to do and with what Jason Mittner was able to do, even though he wasn't on this album, but I think he just really contributes a lot to like the rhythm section and pretty much a lot of like different elements. Um, I mean, Shadows Fall really just deserves the recognition that they deserve, as well as they deserve more credit, because I just think that this band deserves a lot more than what they had gotten. Now, a lot of people would also consider like Killswitch Engage to be the band that invented metalcore, and while a lot of people argue and there's like debatably the best in that genre, I would say that they often, like heard Killswitch Engage even has said that Shadows Fall was an inspiration as well as all their mates. I mean, hell, even Phil sang on Somber Ice the Sky. And when you're look at like the riffs that are incorporated on One of Love and listen to like all their mains debut album Behind Solids and Solitudes, you're gonna see a lot of like similarities. Like in fact, there are some songs that like Clarity or even Erased from Behind Solids and Solitude. So there's like a reminiscent of songs from Of One Blood, and also have a similar guitar sound. Now, when it comes to metalcore, a lot of people could say that metalcore is like heavier music with like singing and screaming, which I pretty much disagree with that statement and completely. I wouldn't call it like a band like I would never in a million years call a band like Opeth, their Soilwork, Fear Factor, or even Deftones metalcore. Not even at the slightest. I mean, they have singing and screaming that's incorporated in it, but they're not even metalcore at all, not a bit. Now, for me, what really defined metalcore, especially in this early era, there was like two different sources. One was like the East Coast hardcore movement, and when you look at another band like Overcast, which was the band that Brian Fair was in before joining Shadows Fall, there's no denying that Brian Fair was taking a lot of like inspiration from bands like Agnostic Fronts, but was also listening to a lot of the bands that pretty much laid down for the groundwork for modern metalcore with bands like Converge or Every Time I Die or Poison the Well. In addition, I feel like there's also the other style, which is like the Gothenburg death metal movement with bands like At the Gates or The Haunted, In Flames, Dark Tranquillity. Yeah, I feel like both those inspirations are really prevalent in like the early metalcore works, and I really think listening to this album, it's just really just paves a path. Well, I feel like it's not perfect on the production side. There's no denying that a little over 2 decades later, it still holds up. It pretty much has the rawness and just the testing of water that makes it charming and ages well. And another thing I want to talk about is I pretty much rambled on for almost 4 minutes, and that we're just really talking about sort of like the backstory of this, but then more than like the actual songs and well. But I also want to talk about like the story of Brian Fair joining. I mean, there's like a podcast that saw Doc Coyle from God Forbid, rest in peace, another great legendary East Coast band. And I feel like Shadows Fall were playing with Overcast, and I've heard that tour it wasn't like really well, and I've heard that Phil Labonte was gonna leave Shadows Fall, and they wanted Brian. I heard Brian just got finished playing with Overcast. Now, Overcast, which also features of Mike D from Killswitch Engage. Now, Overcast was a really heavy band. There's no denying that. They're kind of like mixing with like thrash metal with like hardcore, which I feel like that kind of like paved the way for like modern thrash bands like Havoc and stuff, but that's another story. Now, I feel like also there were some songs on Of One Blood that were originally done with Phil Labonte, but they actually had redone it with Brian. Yeah, and I heard that after like Overcast were done playing playing, or Shadows Fall, I think no, it was Overcast. So Overcast was done playing, and then they approached Brian Fair and they said, "Hey, do you want a job?" And he's like, "Yes." And thus we get the start work of One Blood, and yeah, and now we're finally gonna go into this album track by track. Now, starting things off is Pain Glass Vision. Now, it's just a standard instrumental intro that pretty much sets like the darkness and sort of like the groundwork for this album. And then right away, we just get into the next song, which is Crushing Belial. Now, this is, in my opinion, the strongest opening track that you could open up in a metalcore album, or even just a metal album in general. It's just so powerful and raw, and the riffs that Matt Bashan can do, it just can't go unnoticed. It's just suspenseful and unsettling at the same time, and already we're getting like a good variety of Brian Fair's vocals. It opens up with a kind of like a death metal like growls like that Brian Fair has done with Overcast, but he's also adjusting his style to fit the band, which I think is pretty interesting. With a lot of bands that would have like a vocalist change, they would also kind of like change the style to adjust the vocals, but I feel like Brian is one of those examples that really just adjusts his old vocal, went from another vocal style to adjusting it to another different band, and I feel like think he really stepped up the plate here, and this band pretty much holds nothing back, and then it just pulls back with a really great acoustic part, and it's just very mesmerizing. I think it's a really good song. Then we move on to the title track of the album, of One Blood, which really carries the momentum, and there's some really great use of melodic riffing here, and the soloing here is superb, and you're also getting a great retrospective of what Brian Fair can do vocally here, and this song is just very memorable, one of the most memorable songs on here. The First Noble Truth is the next song. Now this pretty much carries from what we've heard so far from the last two albums, or three if you consider Pain Glass Vision a song. And they pretty much upped it up here. The guitar solos here are kind of repetitive here, but they don't need to like change the solos too much that they're hearing like one between every chorus. It's just so positive sounding and so catchy, and it pretty much adds a lot of like variety that's demonstrated with this album. Fleshhold is the next song, and this is pretty much the riffing here takes like a different approach. It's probably one of, if not the heaviest song on here. It's super aggressive, and Brian Fair really just shows his hardcore style as well as like his past stuff with Overcast. I feel like it's a mixture of Overcast mixed with Somber Eyes to Sky. It's just super brutal song, and it just pulls no punches. And then we get to Rootbound Apollo. Now, Rootbound Apollo kind of like brings back a little bit more of the acoustic elements or slow parts, kind of similar to Crushing Belial. Though it's pretty much a way to vary in sort of like a slowed down sort of like tempo. It's a really beautiful way to sort of like keep the momentum going and up to its infinity. Then we get to Revel in My Loss, which now Revel in My Loss, similar to also to Ashes, is another old song that they originally had done with Phil Labonte before he left, and then he would form All That Remains. And I think that Brian Fair, I mean, no disrespect to Phil, but I feel like Brian Fair just really just took this song and just make it his own. He didn't like try to copy Phil, he just add his own like mix to it. And I think that's a Revel in My Loss is a great song. And then we get to Montauk. Now, Montauk is actually, I believe, from what I've heard, one of the first song that Brian Fair originally wrote for the band. It's just pure relentless, and there are some changes that are shown here, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of like aggressive elements that are shown, and there's also elements of like the aggressive and melody. And Two Ashes is kind of similar to Revel in My Loss, another old song that was left over from Sunrise to Sky, and I think it's really great. And then we close with Serenity, which in my opinion is a classic masterpiece, and all the riffing style that Matt can do, and just I really love having the vocals that Brian Fair also incorporates is fucking amazing. Now overall, Of One Blood by Shadows Fall is a classic metalcore album. Even a little over 2 decades later, it still holds up. And a lot of people, if you're really into metalcore and want to listen to like sort of like the older stuff, this is one album I would recommend. So I'm gonna give this album a score. I'm gonna give Of One Blood by Shadows Fall a solid 9 out of 10. So yep, that's my review of the album, guys. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the album, and I'll see you all in the next video. And as always, keep it metal.